The ceiling fan ticked like a slow metronome above the briefing table, slicing warm air into tired circles. Falcon team clustered around the holomap, 8 shadows in matte armor, while the newcomer sat one chair off the edge like a footnote nobody intended to read. Lieutenant Alara Verne wore her rank like a borrowed jacket, neat, correct, and somehow out of place among men and women built like doorframes and carved from campaign ribbons. She didn't fidget. She didn't try to impress. She just watched, absorbing the room the way dry earth drinks rain. Target compound lies here, Captain Dmitri Kask said, a pen tip rapping on a grid square that glowed dull amber. Former hospital, scrubbed after the last push. We're in for a simple snatch and sweep. Grab drives, tag what matters, exfil. Wheels up at 0500. Simple, Master Sergeant Riker Soren echoed, deadpan. Riker's face looked like it had been sanded by wind and regret. He leaned back, chair protesting under a man built like a battlefield. Sir, with respect, what's simple about dragging an intel analyst onto a T1 hit? We run lighter than this. He didn't whisper, and he didn't aim the complaint away from Alara. Heads tilted. A few smirks creased around the table. Orders had already answered that question, but Kask still felt the need to make the answer sting. Command wants real-time assessment, he said, eyes flicking toward Alara as if she were a piece of equipment he hadn't ordered. She stays on our hip and out of our way. Specialist Leaf Harrow, lanky, lethal, eyes always squinting like he could see farther than the rest, tapped his knuckle twice on the table. I've got 20 on her having a panic attack before the first door. Sergeant Nyala Oryx tightened a strap on her plate carrier. She'd been the lone woman on Falcon before Alara. The fact mattered to exactly no one in the room more than it did to her. Make it 40 on an early extract, she said without looking up. No shame in it. This isn't the place for tourists. Alara let the banter pass like wind around a corner. The map scrolled under Kask's hand. Alleys, shattered courtyards, concrete blocks, half-eaten by the desert. She tracked the annotations, archways, sightlines, elevation, quietly mapping them to a calculus she didn't share. When the loadmaster rolled a case of comms across the floor, she stood, accepted a handset, and checked the frequencies without commentary. Her movements were spare, efficient. Thumb, dial, confirm. No flourish. No false starts. When weapons were issued, the team's long guns clacked and hissed with the familiar music of bolts and safety checks. For Alara, a standard-issue sidearm and 2 magazines. The implication was as loud as a fire alarm. Kask swiped to the final approach. We insert from the northwest. Stairwell here, he said, sketching a line toward a blown-out vestibule. Minimal exposure, best speed. Alara lifted her hand. Not hesitant, deliberate. Sir, she said, voice mild enough to avoid the reflexive pushback, firm enough to enter the conversation. The eastern corridor offers fewer elevated positions. These rooftops, she tapped 3 squares, create a kill funnel if someone's waiting. Silence rolled through the room. The kind that isn't empty so much as sharp. Kask's jaw set. We've wargamed this, Lieutenant. We're not revising the approach in the 11th hour. It's the 10th, Harrow said under his breath, smiling without warmth. Alara lowered her hand. Understood. Across the table, the team medic, Corporal Thale Meridian, watched the exchange with a clinician's eyes, measuring pulse without touching a wrist. When the room scraped its chairs back and hunger for motion took over, he drifted her way and pressed 2 extra magazines into her palm. Paper cuts can bleed, he said lightly. Thank you, she replied, storing them with the familiarity of someone who always knew where every piece of gear lived on her person. Riker caught it, the quiet competence, and didn't like what it did to his earlier certainty. He masked the feeling by standing, big and impatient, eager for the thump of rotors to erase talking. They filed out to the pad, under a sky just beginning to bruise from black to blue. 3 Blackhawks waited with engines ticking softly, like animals flexing before a run. Rotor blades held still above them, a hush before thunder. Kask set the order with hand signals. Alara drifted to the rear slot assigned to her, where the wash of dust would be worst and the visibility least, and clipped in without comment. Inside the bird, red cabin lights painted everyone meat dark. Weapons were a constellation of dull metal and trust. Harrow and Nyala shared a look that said the bet was still on. Riker leaned in toward Kask with just enough deference to pass muster. "Last call, sir. She rides, or she watches from the fence." "She rides," Kask said, not because he wanted, but because wanting had never mattered in his career. Thale settled beside Alara, securing his med kit with the practiced impatience of a man who'd done it too often in aircraft he'd rather not be in. "First time with Falcon?" he asked, pitching his voice below the rotor spool. "With Falcon," she said. The words conveyed exactly what they contained and nothing more. The turbines spooled from whine to roar. The helicopter rose, the base shrinking into a toy town of hangars and emplacements. Through the open door, the world unrolled. Dun earth, rock ribs, the serpentine silver of a dry riverbed catching early light. Alara studied the terrain like a librarian scans a shelf, knowing what should be there, noting what wasn't. She let her gaze settle on the target compound as it grew from a blur into a fact. Even from here she could read the posture of the building, a sprawling hospital skeleton wearing new scars. Something tugged at the edge of her attention, a pattern where there should have been noise. A pair of rooftop screens that didn't belong on a facility that had no power. A satellite dish angled against logic. Dust trails on a service road that didn't match the wind. The kind of telling that lives in the periphery, easy to miss if you're looking for heroics instead of seams. Riker leaned past her to scope the same view. "Kind of place where ghost stories come from," he said, trying to own the space with casual menace. "Ghosts keep poor records," Alara said, almost to herself. The bird bucked one pocket of turbulence, and then another. The pilot carving a precise arc. Kask slid along the bench to check harnesses like he didn't trust anyone else to care whether his people fell out. When he reached Alara, his inspection paused for a fraction, something in her eyes not matching her file photograph. He looked away faster than he'd intended. 2 minutes, the crew chief yelled, voice fractured by the headset. Harrow cupped his hand near Nyala's ear. "Time to test your 40, he mouthed with theatrical uplift. Nyala didn't bite. She adjusted her sling, fingers quick and neat, eyes already making a doorway of the future. Alara's hand drifted, not to her weapon, but to the comm dial. Frequencies were right. Encryption thick. She listened anyway, as if sound could tell her something the numbers couldn't. In the rhythm of radio static, she heard a hush that wasn't natural, a shape of silence that only existed when someone had carved it on purpose. She filed it away. Her mind built a plan on top of Kask's plan, and then a plan for when that plan broke. Angles, distances, the weight of a human body compared to a cinder block. The average time it took a person to realize a noise wasn't nothing. The way breath moved in a chest that had learned to lie. "Final," the pilot said, and the world lowered its shoulder and rammed them. Skids kissed dirt, dust ballooned, and the door gunner's world narrowed to arcs of permission and threat. They spilled out into heat that smelled like old concrete and dry rot. The hospital hunched against the horizon, corridors like arteries clogged by sand. Kask chopped them forward, and the team moved the way only repetition makes possible. Curves of arrival smoothly meeting corners of caution. Alara drifted where she'd been told to drift, rear security on a leash. It was a leash she pretended not to notice. At the main entrance, wind had sketched calligraphy in the dust. The script broke near the threshold, newer tracks, narrower stride lengths, someone careful or light. Alara paused one step, the sort of pause you can blame on a pebble in your boot. There, a faint smear on the jam at shoulder height, like a thumbprint of oil. A wire's ghost in the ceiling shadow. Not a trip, not a bomb, something else. She let her gaze climb and found, tucked into a vent lip, a device with no right to look that clean in a dead building. Movement pattern inconsistencies, she murmured, pitched for herself the way some people think in pencil. Thale, crowding behind her, heard anyway. "What?" Kask's voice crackled in their ears. "Radio discipline. Vern, stick with Meridian. Rear stay rear." "Copy," Alara said, and it sounded like agreement. They entered the hallway. Emergency lights stuttered alive in red intervals, painting the plaster cracks like wounds. Alara counted steps to cover. She tasted the air, antiseptic layered under dust, the way certain places insist on remembering what they were. Another device lived at the next junction, too sleek to be a relic. She felt her posture shift, a minute recalibration of center of gravity. Thale noticed, because medics are paid to notice what people don't say. "Nerves," he asked softly. "Wrong building," she said. Not louder, truer. "Wrong intel. Wrong approach." Ahead, the team's feed filled with soft callouts, clear left, clear right door. The audio tags of a well-practiced waltz. Kask's voice angled brighter. "Pay dirt. We've got drives and paper and—" Alara's thumb touched her push-to-talk. "Captain, be advised, multiple signal jammers embedded in the infrastructure. If they spawn, we lose comms." "Noted," Kask replied, tone flattening. "Maintain position. We're on timeline." Her jaw tightened without it reaching her face. Too perfect, she thought. Boxes exactly where a doctrine says to put them. Trails swept just dirty enough to sell story. A dead place breathing on schedule. She mapped exits. She counted bodies. She cataloged the artifacts people leave when they pretend they weren't there. And though no one had asked her to, though the brief had assigned her the safe edges of the page, she began, quietly, invisibly, to rewrite the margin notes of the mission. By the time the first shot cracked the corridor like a knuckle pop, her hand was already on the doorframe. Her foot already pointed toward the angle that would save a life she hadn't been told to save. No one saw the moment she stopped being a passenger. They only felt the air change, a pressure drop in the room, as though something they hadn't invited had arrived anyway and taken its seat at the table. The first round hit the light panel, exploding it into a spray of white shards and black smoke. The second chewed a groove through plaster at head height. Sound collapsed into pure math. Angles, echoes, the skip-snap of ricochets. Falcon Team flattened to walls so fast it looked rehearsed, but the choreography belonged to the unseen shooters now. Fire stitching from niches no one had cleared, because no one knew those niches existed. Contact front multiple. Crossfire. Harrow's voice clipped through the net, then blurred into static as the jammers woke all at once, turning speech into crushed ice. The channel died with a hollow click. Silence fell on their headsets like a hood. Alara didn't flinch at the comms blackout. She'd already counted the devices and placed their radii like overlapping dark moons in her mind. She felt the plan falter beneath her boots. Kask's plan, neat and military, meeting the ugly reality of a trap designed by someone who studied that neatness for a living. Riker took a knee behind a reception desk that dropped dust like old snow with each impact. Nyala slid the last meter to cover, teeth bared and jaw tight, blood slicking her pants where a splinter of something had found her thigh. Thale dove after her, kit open before his body had settled. Hold pressure, eyes on me," he said, voice pitched for the pocket of space between heartbeats. Kask scanned for a flank and found none worth the name. "Push left," he started to shout, purely by habit, then stopped because no one would hear. Alara vanished. No drama in it, no gasp, no cinematic leap. 1 second, she was a slim figure at the rear with a sidearm and extra mags. The next she was a phantom in peripheral vision, moving along the wall in a step pattern that didn't match the learned cadences of soldiers. She took the corner not with a pie slice, but a half spiral, unfolding into the blind spot of the first shooter like she had read the man's breath. 2 shots, both subsonic, buried themselves where they were meant to. He folded before his body understood what had happened. In the same motion, she let the pistol go weightless for a heartbeat, palm catching the barrel of an assault rifle that swung toward Thale's exposed back. She redirected it, let the muzzle pass her hip by a hair, then drove the shooter's own momentum into the wall, sending a fracture skittering across old tile. A firm, precise strike stole the rest of his fight. He sagged. She didn't watch him fall. Farther down the corridor, a hidden panel thumped open, and 2 more stepped out in near-perfect unison, the kind of move that tells you training had been paid for. Harrow, pinned behind a dented rolling cabinet, glimpsed them and made a choice. He popped up for a shot, knowing it was a coin toss between heroism and a stretcher. He didn't need to. A knife appeared in the base of the first man's skull, with a humble thunk of steel meeting soft target. The second pivoted toward the throw, finger tightening. His barrel smacked sideways as Alara arrived like a whispered thought, her handbrake stopping his trigger pull and turning it into his own ruin. He sagged to a cough that didn't finish. Harrow blinked, registering the knife's angle, the economy of motion, the absence of wasted breath. He'd seen fast work before. He hadn't seen this. At the reception desk, plastered dust gritted between Riker's teeth. He tracked a shadow moving to his right and waited for the head that usually followed. When none came, he realized the shadow had been hers. A careful head lift showed him a flanked group melting into the maze of hallways with purpose, preparing to take their backs. He had half a second to broadcast that with a hand signal no one could see. Alara cut them off by not being where anyone expected. She used the building's scars, gashes in drywall, a missing ceiling panel, a collapsed gurney, to pull herself into a latticework of vertical space. The first man passed beneath her. She dropped, unacceptable weight distributed across 2 points, and negative space became leverage. He hit the floor with his throat convinced of different priorities. The second swiveled, saw a ghost, fired, missed, fired again, and had his wrist collapsed with a pressure that turned his shot into a ceiling scream. She didn't relish it. She didn't slow. Nyala's breath hissed through her teeth. Thale leaned over her wound with gloved hands and focus like a scalpel. Clean through, he murmured for her, for himself. You lucky stubborn, keep breathing. In. Out. He spared one look toward the chaos and saw Alara ghost past, a blur of human choices refined down to function. He told his heart to behave. At the intel room, the honeybait cask had reached just as everything detonated. Paper fluttered in the air like exhausted birds. Hard drives winked on a table with a mocking little LED. Cask shouldered up, grabbed the nearest drive, because muscle memory demanded he salvage at least one good thing from this mess. Rounds chewed gouges in the steel doorframe beside him. He ducked back, counted breaths, peeked low, and saw an angle built to kill him. The angle evaporated. A flash, the sound a hand makes when it meets cartilage. Someone yelped in a language Cask didn't speak, and then stopped speaking anything. He looked up into a slice of a face, eyes flat and bright. Out of the funnel, Alara said. No please, no sir, just physics. Cask went, trusting the instruction before he could justify that trust to himself. They moved. Not a retreat, something else, a redirection that bent around danger like water. Alara counted them without counting. Riker, Harrow, Nyala, Thale, Cask did the math, came up one short. Riker's grimace told the rest. He'd lost track in the first blur of chaos, pulled away by a tide of bullets and broken corners. A grenade clinked somewhere indecently close, the unmistakable punctuation mark of a sentence that ends in pieces. The hostile who tossed it shouted to his partner, victory already en route to his mouth. Alara broke cover against her own rules. A straight-line sprint across open ground a sane person wouldn't cross for a bar of gold, and reached the device on the second bounce. She didn't heave it back. She pinched, rolled her wrist under and inward, and shoved it into the missing space where the wall met the floor. The detonation punched the building's lungs and coughed a load-bearing secret into rubble. 3 silhouettes emerging for the flank went down under a crush of material. The rest of the corridor held. Barely. Harrow swore a reverent, disbelieving whisper. What the? East corridor, Alara said, reappearing beside Thale and lifting Nyala by the harness with a strength that looked borrowed from someone larger. 17 meters to a defensible position. 2 lines of sight, both interruptible. Now, no one argued. When someone solves the math of not dying for you in real time, you follow them. They crab-walked and slid and lunged, weight distributed between cover and momentum, Thale counting Nyala's breaths under his own. Alara reached upward into an exposed duct, found the wire she'd been looking for, and sliced it with a tool that didn't live in any standard kit. Somewhere in the ceiling, a jammer coughed and died, the air thinning as their radios squinted into focus. Cask's mic squealed back into life, then steadied. Port? Say again, status. Fragmented, Riker reported. Voice rough, but present. West Wing, second floor. I've got one shadow glued to me, and he brought friends. Alara watched a door in the east corridor ease inward as if pushed by a careful breeze. She fired once through the gap, then twice more, each shot a solution. Silence answered. We hold here, Kask said, reasserting gravity. Meridian, house. Stable enough to move, Thale said. But I'd love fewer bullets. Copy. Harrow rear. Riker, sound off every 30. We're coming. We. Harrow muttered, but he set himself where he was told, muzzle covering a dark square that wanted to become a problem. Alara was already gone again. The east corridor ended in a half-collapsed stairwell. Alara didn't take the stairs. She took the negative space along the railing. Fingers and boots finding bites where smooth metal swore there were none. She rose without noise, a tide without wind, and slid into the second-floor hall that used to carry gurneys and grief. Her breath never climbed. Her heart knew the route. Riker's pulse left a trail no regular sense could follow. Stress throws heat and smell and sound in peculiar directions. But she knew the patterns of cornered men, and the hostile language here was written in boot scuffs and discarded tape and the faint rubber stink of a doorstop used recently. She moved through those sentences the way she'd been taught to move through arguments. Listen, remove what isn't needed, end it. The surgical suite had become a stage. Riker stood against a wall, knife at his throat, leverage all wrong, options closing like a lens. The man holding the blade was calm in the way of professionals who understand they've won but refuse to celebrate early. His eyes flicked to the doorway, waiting for the next American to oblige him. Alara didn't give him a doorway. She stepped out of the ceiling shadow, behind his left shoulder, posture unthreatening to the untrained eye, everything else a line of purpose. She spoke in Arabic, crisp and local enough to unspool the man's certainty. Put down the knife and you see sunrise. He twitched, his grip eased by a hair, ego answering the voice that sounded like home from a face that didn't. He started to turn to confirm what his ear told him. That was the moment the training she confessed to no one, not really, made its demand. She made 3 moves that didn't belong to any doctrine Riker knew. A sidestep that stole the man's base, a palm blade that ate the distance between tendon and intent, and a torque that convinced bones to negotiate. The knife left Riker's throat and traveled in a tiny, dignified arc to the floor. The man followed in less dignity, breath punched out, lights dimmed. Up, Alara said to Riker without inflection. He rose, one hand at his neck where the blade had kissed a shaving line. His eyes were wild and weirdly young in a face too old for that look. You speak. Later, she said, already pushing him toward a doorway that didn't exist until she made one out of a collapsed cabinet and a half-kick panel. 2 more in the hall. They'll stack wrong. You'll be fine if you don't try to be a hero. He snorted despite himself. That's the uniform. She led him the long way back, which is to say the safe way, which is to say the way people who survive learn to love. They re-entered the jammer's graveyard and Kask's voice met them, lined with equal parts. Relief and command. Welcome back. We're peeling in 5. Birds inbound. Vern. 3 minutes, she said, checking a watch whose face didn't tell time so much as it told futures. Secure the perimeter. They did. They made a ring out of bruised bodies and stubborn competence. Nyala gritted her teeth and watched her sector. Harrow muttered to his rifle, the litany of shooters who ask gods they don't believe in to keep one more magazine honest. Thale kept his gloves sticky and his humor dry. Riker posted up where he could see the most and move the least, a concession his pride swallowed without much chewing. Kask stood at the center of the storm he didn't start, eyes on everything like a man who can't afford to blink. Alara walked the fallen, confirming in quiet, professional ways that none would stand up behind them. She didn't catalog trophies. She cataloged evidence, custom grips, uncommon stitching, a pattern of scars that told of training camps that weren't supposed to exist anymore. She stored it all in the same vault. She kept her heartbeat. Rotor thrum grew from rumor to presence. Dust lifted in anticipation. On another day, in another story, Victory would taste sweet here. Today it tasted like copper and decisions. Nyala broke the spell, voice steady despite the white knuckles. Who are you? It wasn't accusation now. It was simple, human confusion shaped into words. Alara looked at her team, the people who had mocked, measured, doubted, and followed, and gave them the version of the truth her protocols allowed. Lieutenant Alara Verne, she said. Intelligence liaison. No one laughed. Even Harrow didn't find a joke. The title was too small a coat for the person wearing it, and everyone knew it. The birds kissed ground. Hands reached, stretcher slid, command snapped back into the comfortable world where rank and roles are clear. As they lifted, the compound shrank into lines and shadows again, returning to being a rumor in stone. Cask stared across the cabin at the woman whose presence had rewritten his day. She stared back unblinking, as if daring him to ask the questions she couldn't answer. He didn't. Not yet. Questions require breath, and the helicopter stole breath and turned it into vibration. For now, surviving was enough. On the horizon, the morning finally caught up with them, light pouring over the desert's bones. Alara watched it come and felt nothing she could name, only a pressure behind her ribs like the promise of a storm. Choices made in the dark have a way of asking to be explained in daylight. She had 3 minutes of quiet to prepare for that daylight, and she intended to use every second. The forward operating base was still shaking the desert dust from its walls when Falcon Team's debrief was called. 6 hours since extraction, and the air in the briefing room already felt too thin. Metal chairs scraped concrete as the team arranged themselves, not by rank, but by an unspoken gravity. Wounded close to the medic, the most senior operators near the captain, and Alara Verne slightly apart, as if the room couldn't quite decide whether she belonged inside or outside its walls. She didn't fidget. She didn't try to command attention. She sat still, hands folded on the table like a model student, her gaze fixed on some middle distance the others couldn't see. The weight in the room wasn't from fatigue. It was from the questions nobody could stop thinking. Captain Cask paced behind his chair, boots marking a rhythm too quick for the mood. Riker leaned against the far wall, arms folded, expression halfway between suspicion and calculation. Harrow sat with his elbows on the table, knuckles pressed together hard enough to blanch. Nyala was pale but upright, a bandage wrapped clean and tight around her thigh. Thale pretended to be busy checking her dressing again, though it was perfect. He just didn't want to be idle. The door hissed open. Everyone turned. The woman who entered didn't wear Falcon's patch, nor any sign of belonging to their chain of command. Colonel Ambra Vale carried herself like gravity was hers to assign. Tall, silver-streaked hair tied in a precise knot, eyes sharp enough to cut through every layer of someone's story. She didn't need to announce authority. She radiated it. Captain Cask, Sergeant Soren, stay. The rest of you are dismissed, she said without pause, voice smooth as steel. Harrow's head came up. With respect, ma'am, we were all there. We all deserve to know what happened. Vale looked at him, and the silence that followed was somehow louder than the firefight they'd survived. You will be briefed on a need-to-know basis, specialist. And right now, you do not need to know. It wasn't a dismissal. It was a door slamming shut. When the others had filed out, Nyala hobbling slightly, Harrow muttering something low enough to be harmless, Vale took the chair opposite Alara. She didn't waste time. Your team, she said to Cask without looking away from Alara, was not the primary objective of this operation. You were a delivery system. Cask stopped pacing. Delivery system for what? For Lieutenant Verne. The words landed with the weight of a detonation. Riker's jaw flexed, anger heating the edges of his composure. You used my team as bait? Not bait, Vale corrected, still not looking at him. A convincing cover. Cask's voice dropped into dangerous territory. 2 of my people are dead. Others wounded. All for a cover. Vale's gaze flicked to him, cool but precise. Lieutenant Verne is part of Program Chimera, deep cover operatives trained and conditioned beyond standard doctrine. She was placed with you not as an analyst, but as your insurance policy. Insurance. The word was almost worse than bait. Riker stepped forward. Insurance doesn't usually come with a silencer and the reflexes of a knife fight. Vale finally leaned back, hands folding in a way that made the gesture look more like control than rest. The compound was a trap, yes. But not for you. Our target was a leak inside military command. We knew they'd feed your mission profile to the cell. We needed them to think you were vulnerable. So you walked us into an ambush on purpose, Cass said, each word bitten off. We ensured you had an asset capable of controlling the situation, Vale replied. And we got what we came for, the data and the confirmation of the leak's identity. Falcon Team was always meant to survive. Cask's eyes slid toward Alara. And you knew. Alara's face didn't move, but something in her posture shifted, like the faintest tightening of an invisible rope. Before she could answer, Vale spoke for her. She was bound by operational protocol. Direct warning would have compromised the mission. Cask understood now, the small correction during the approach briefing, the attempt to shift their entry point. The warning wrapped in technical language that command could ignore. He looked back at her. That's why you tried to change the route. Alara gave the barest nod. I want the truth, Cask said to Vale. What is Program Chimera? Who is she really? Vale's expression didn't change. That's classified above your clearance. What matters is that Lieutenant Verne will remain with Falcon Team. That decision is final. She stood, adjusting her jacket without hurry. Your new deployment orders will arrive tomorrow. Dismissed. When the door shut, the room felt smaller. Cask stared at Alara like he was seeing her for the first time. Are you even a lieutenant? My rank is legitimate, she said evenly. My file is curated. And your combat capabilities? Where do they come from? Riker asked. Alara met his eyes without flinching. Specialized training and certain enhancements. She didn't elaborate. Cask exhaled through his nose, a sound halfway between frustration and reluctant respect. So we're supposed to trust you now? After finding out our mission was a lie. Her voice was calm, but the edges were sharper now. Trust is earned, Captain. I understand that. When they stepped into the corridor, the rest of Falcon Team was waiting. The silence was heavier here, tinged with the smell of antiseptic and dust. So, Harrow asked, his voice tight. We getting answers or just more classified shrugging? Lieutenant Verne stays, Cask said simply. That's all I can give you. The reactions were a spectrum. Harrow's open hostility, Nyala's reluctant acceptance, Vale's quiet observation. He was the only one who approached Alara directly. You should let me check for injuries, he said. You were in the thick of it more than anyone. I'm uninjured, she replied. Then, almost as an afterthought, thank you for your concern. Vale studied her face. Was any of it real? The person we met yesterday. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then something, small, human, slipped through her composure. Parts, she said quietly. More than I'm supposed to allow. The words left the team unsettled, unsure whether to see her as a guardian angel or something far more dangerous. But as far as Alara was concerned, the question wasn't theirs alone. It was hers too. The desert sun bled slowly across the horizon, spilling pale gold through the forward base's chain-link shadows. Inside the equipment bay, Falcon Team's new deployment orders sat like a sealed verdict on the table. The envelope was thin, but the weight in the air around it was anything but. Captain Cask broke the seal. His eyes scanned the contents twice before he spoke. We deploy at 0600 tomorrow. Eastern Sector. Counter-terrorism op. Standard rules of engagement. Harrow leaned back in his chair, stretching the tension out of his shoulders. Standard? After last time? You believe that? No, Cask said flatly. But it's the mission we've been given. And this time, he glanced at Alara, Lieutenant Verne will be carrying a full loadout. Heads turned. The sidearm-only pretense was gone. On the bench beside her, an M4 lay stripped and gleaming, components lined with mathematical precision. A tactical knife sat in its sheath, freshly honed. Extra magazines, flashbangs, and a compact med kit filled the remaining space. She handled each item with unhurried care, her movements as deliberate as a watchmaker. Guess that means she's officially one of us now, Nyala said, though her tone was neutral, almost testing. Harrow muttered, or we're just the latest cage they've dropped her into. Kask ignored the jab. When the team began to disperse, he stayed behind, watching Alara reassemble her rifle. She didn't look up when she spoke. You're not telling me everything about this mission. That makes two of us, Kask said. She locked the bolt forward with a clean, decisive snap. Give me one reason I should trust you with my team's lives again, he said. She set the rifle down and turned to face him fully, her eyes steady. Because I chose to stay with Falcon Team. Program Chimera operatives aren't usually consulted about their assignments. This time, I was given a choice. I chose you. Something in her voice, calm but edged with a truth she couldn't quite hide, made Kask pause. Why? Operational familiarity increases efficiency, she said. But the faintest trace of something warmer flickered and vanished. Bullshit, Kask replied, but without heat. You could have completed that last mission without us. You didn't. Alara returned to her gear check, but her hands seemed less mechanical now, her focus not entirely inward. Perhaps it means something. At 0545 the next morning, the hangar smelled of fuel and steel. Falcon Team moved with a quiet purpose of people about to put their lives in each other's hands again. Riker gave Alara a short nod as she joined the formation, not friendly, not hostile, but acknowledging her as a combatant. Nyala shifted to give her space without comment. Thales smiled once in her direction. Glad to have you fully armed this time. Harrow kept his gaze forward, voice low enough for only her to hear. Still not sure if you're our guardian angel or a ticking time bomb. Alara checked her weapon with practiced precision. Sometimes I don't know either, she said, almost conversationally. The Blackhawk's rotor spun, throwing dust in spirals. The team climbed aboard, settling into the cramped space. Through the scratched plexiglass, the dawn fractured into overlapping reflections of Alara's face, soldier, operative, something else. She studied the horizon, but her eyes seemed to hold more than the mission ahead. Whatever she truly was, she had made a choice. And in her world, choice was rarer than survival. The target was a warehouse district on the city's eastern fringe, an industrial skeleton where wind carried the stench of oil and rust. Falcon Team dropped into the shadows between crumbling walls, their boots silent over gravel and grit. Kask's voice was low in their comms. Objective is Building 12. Data server on site. Hostile guard presence probable. No alarms. It should have been a straightforward breach and clear. The kind that still carried risk, but not the nightmare they'd lived last time. And yet, the hair on Alara's neck prickled before they'd even reached the first door. She scanned the perimeter. Graffiti too fresh, debris patterns too deliberate. Someone had staged this place. Captain, she murmured, this site is too clean. They've prepared it for. The first shot cut her off, sparking against the steel doorframe. Then the night roared alive with automatic fire. Contact front and high. Harrow yelled, already returning rounds toward a rooftop silhouette. The comms didn't die this time, no jammers, but the chaos was instant. Hostiles poured from a side alley, moving with the discipline of a trained unit. Not scavengers. Not gang muscle. Professionals. Fall back. Kask ordered, shifting the team into a defensive arc. Nyala, cover left. Harrow, rooftop suppression. Alara didn't retreat with them. She surged forward into the nearest gap, her M4 tight to her shoulder, each shot controlled and purposeful. She wasn't trying to win the fight in volume. She was unpicking it, unraveling the enemy's formation thread by thread. Through the muzzle flashes, Thale caught sight of her movements and felt the same jolt he'd experienced in Syria. She was in her element again, no hesitation, no wasted effort, just lethal precision. A hostile flanked from east, slipping through a collapsed section of wall. His rifle was already rising toward Harrow's exposed side. Alara pivoted, closed the space in 3 long strides, and drove her forearm into his weapon hand before he could fire. The gun clattered to the ground. She stepped inside his guard, used his own weight against him, and ended it without breaking stride. Clear on the east, she called, voice level. Kask caught her eye across the chaos. Stay with the group, Lieutenant. Her answer came clipped through the net. I am. And then she was gone again, threading through the battlefield like a needle pulling safety into the seams. 2 minutes in, the fight reached a knife edge. Riker's cover was degrading under sustained fire. Nyala's breathing had grown sharp over comms. Pain or fatigue, maybe both. The enemy was pressing, fast and coordinated. Then the call came over the net, a new voice, deep and confident, speaking in accented English. Lieutenant Verne, we know you're here. Orders are not to kill you. Come now and your team lives. The words hit like a flare in the dark. Everyone looked her way. Kask's voice cut in immediately. Ignore it. Stay on mission. But Alara's expression had shifted, unreadable even to herself. Whoever this voice belonged to, it wasn't just an enemy commander. It was someone who knew her real file, the one Falcon team would never see. The enemy was baiting her, but the bait was sharp enough to draw blood without touching her. She had seconds to decide. Option 1. Follow orders, stay with the team, and risk the fight grinding them into casualties. Option 2. Break formation, hunt the voice, and end the threat at the root. Her gaze flicked to Nyala, pinned under fire. To Harrow, cursing as his rifle's bolt jammed. To Thale, pressed over Nyala's wound with one hand and firing his sidearm with the other. Choice made. Cover me, she said, already moving. She broke from the defensive arc and cut down the alley where the voice had come from. A hostile stepped into her path. One round to center mass gone. Another dropped from a fire escape. Knife, clean insertion, silent fall. The voice came again, closer now. You were never supposed to be here, Verne. They're using you. She didn't slow. She found him at the far end of the alley, crouched behind a stack of crates, headset crackling. His eyes widened at the sight of her, but only for a fraction of a second. He'd expected her. You could have walked away, he said in Arabic. She replied in the same language, her tone flat as stone. So could you. The fight was short. Too short. He was good, but he fought like a man who believed the fight would end in negotiation. She fought like a woman who'd stopped believing in that years ago. When it was over, she keyed her comms. Command element down. Hostiles fragmenting. By the time she returned, the fight had shifted. With their leader gone, the enemy's coordination dissolved into retreat. Falcon team pushed forward, clearing the last pockets of resistance. Kask met her at the corner of Building 12, breath heavy. You disobeyed a direct order. I neutralized the threat, she countered, calm as if they were back in a briefing room. You also exposed yourself to capture, Riker added, anger simmering under the relief. Alara scanned the rooftops one last time before lowering her rifle. I made a choice. One I'll answer for. Kask stared at her for a long moment, then gave a short nod. You just did. Back on the exfil chopper, the wind whipped at them through the open bay. Harrow leaned in toward her over the engine noise. So which are you, Verne? Angel or time bomb? Alara looked past him, to where the city lights faded into desert night. Sometimes, she said, you don't get to know until it goes off. The helicopter banked toward home. And for the first time, Falcon team wasn't sure if they were bringing back an asset or the most dangerous ally they'd ever have.